Before the video begins, I just wanted to say, be sure to head over to our guest narrator's channel after this video. Sir Spooks does analysis and presentations of scary videos featuring ghosts, creatures, and other mysterious subjects, so be sure to subscribe to him if you don't feel like sleeping in the near future. Now enjoy the stories. So, nearly 10 years ago now, my long-term relationship came to an end, and the breakup was just a complete disaster. Long story short, he dumped me, we were still living together, it turned nasty, and I was heartbroken. Not heartbroken like feeling a bit sad and treating myself to a tub of ice cream. I'm talking full-on, can't get out of bed, no appetite-style depression where I literally couldn't stop crying for days. Not my proudest moment, but I was young and he was my first boyfriend, so I think he can let me off. Anyways, I remember poring through all these breakup-themed podcasts and reading all these Reddit posts about how best to deal with a breakup. The one common theme among them, or at least many of them, is that you just have to rebound. You need someone to remind you that it's not the end of the world and there's plenty of more fish in the sea. Ideally, you want a guy that'll worship you. Just be that self-esteem boost you so desperately need. I appreciate it might sound a bit tacky just coming out and saying it plain like that, but it is what it is. So, this was right when Tinder had first come out, something like the summer of 2013. My friends had raved about it being a laugh, so I thought, hey, why not give it a go? I downloaded it, made a profile, then got to swiping. After that, all I had to do was wait. And as most girls will tell you, I didn't have to wait long. And by the end of that weekend, I had 14 different matches, and each of them was someone I'd have gone for coffee with. But there was one in particular whose chat game was on point, so to speak. He had this way of making me feel amazing about myself, and maybe because I was so blinded by low self-esteem, I just didn't pick up on any weird vibes until it was too late. A big part of his game seemed to be compliments, and obviously that's exactly what I was looking for. But at some point, his compliments seemed to tip over the line of wanting me, and into more like wanting to be me. He first said something after we slept together for the first time, but it was something like, "I wish my skin was as soft as yours." So it was easy to mistake it for a compliment and not like an actual wish. But then, as we're in bed together, the compliments got weirder and weirder. Then he started asking me all these kind of probing questions about what it was like being me. I remember I started answering one of his questions, but then he suddenly cuts me off with something like, "It must be so easy being you." He said it in a kind of sad way, like he was actually upset he wasn't me. I tried to laugh it off and say like it's not so easy, but then I swear to God, he pinches some of my skin enough to hurt me a little and said, "I wish I could wear this." I'm not even joking. I asked him to clarify what he meant, just out of pure disbelief really, and that's when he came out and said, "I wish I could wear your skin." I found myself recoiling, not just because of the light pain of his pinch, but also because of his words. I'd never had anyone say something so creepy to me in my entire life, and I appreciate that he said it in the heat of the moment or whatever. But after that, I found myself feeling increasingly uneasy around him. I got out of bed, went to the bathroom, and when I came back, it looked like he'd stuffed something under his pillow just as I walked in. That was the sort of crossing the proverbial Rubicon for me, and I just put on my nice girl act and told him that as much as I wanted to see him again, he'd have to catch a cab home so I could get on with my day. Whatever he'd stuffed under the pillow, I'd deal with that afterward, I thought. So, I got him out of the house, baked a big hug and a see you soon, then rushed upstairs to see what he'd stuffed under my pillow. I was seriously dreading something gross being under there. I don't know what exactly, just something that'd make me retch as soon as I lifted up the pillow. But it wasn't gross. It was just my hairbrush. But one little detail made my skin crawl just the same. I'm one of those girls who has a lot of hair come out during brushings. I think maybe because it's so thick or maybe it's brittle, but either way, there's always a lot of hair stuck to my brush. But when I pulled that pillow back, there was barely a strand of hair present. That pervert had taken my hair. I just remember feeling physically sick, like unclean that I'd actually slept with him. I felt stupid, needy, naive, just this huge mix of emotions that ended in me running to the toilet and throwing up. And granted, it was me puking up a load of red wine and cheese from the night before, and it was probably coming up at some point anyway, but the whole hair theft just sped up the whole process. After that, I called a friend and just poured my heart out to them. And then she helped me calm down enough to just block the guy's number in social media. I was worried about him turning up at my place for a while, like it was so nerve-wracking with him knowing where I lived, but I guess he had more sense to show up uninvited. After all, he'd gotten his little souvenir, so maybe he was satisfied with leaving it there. I just hope the next girl he ends up dating isn't subjected to the same kind of weirdness.
Scariest thing that ever happened to anyone I know happened to my mom. Kind of fortunate that me and my sister were staying with friends in the next town over, but it was still pretty traumatic for my mom. But anyway, here goes. This one night, she was in bed reading, and since it gets really warm here in the summer, she had her bedroom window open, but had the curtain closed to keep the bugs out. All of a sudden, she sees this hand move the curtain aside to reveal this dead-eyed looking dude just staring at her. Seconds later, he smiles, then starts trying to climb inside. It was a small window, so as the guy was clambering in, she had time to grab her cell off the nightstand before bolting to my grandma's room. She then hauls her out the bed, basically carries her into the bathroom and locks the door. Her first move is to call the cops and to just hold up in the bathroom in the hope the guy would just leave when he couldn't find anyone. Obviously, there was the chance he'd just steal some stuff and leave, which is bad, but it's better than people getting hurt. So, Mom said that, as much as she was terrified, once she was locked in the bathroom behind the heavy door, she felt just a little safer, especially when she was told that the cops were on their way. But then, right as she hears the good news about responding police, she said she heard this big old crash out in the second floor hallway. Mom said it sounded like the guy was kicking in closet doors, or just regular doors, all which screaming stuff like, "Where are you, girl? I'm gonna find ya." She and my grandma had to do their best to keep as quiet as they could, but that just made it easier to hear the guy smashing his way along the second floor, getting closer and closer to their hiding spot each time. He was almost at our bathroom door when Mom said she heard sirens, and she prayed for them to get louder and louder in the hopes they'd scare the guy away. Luckily, it worked, and she said she heard the guy's heavy footfalls moving quickly down our old wooden stairs, as he obviously tried to make an escape. The cops caught the guy fleeing through backyards in the neighborhood, which was obviously great news, and I didn't find this out until years later. But the same guy was wanted in connection with a bunch of different home invasions and indecent assaults, some of which were extremely brutal. It was horrifying to know that my mom and grandma could have had that same sort of treatment in store for them, and I think there might have been a little divine intervention involved, considering how close he was to finding them before the cops showed up.
When I was younger, somewhere between 5 or 8, a distant family member who was supposedly well loved died, and one of his last wishes was for the final celebration of his life to take place at his childhood home. His son, DJ, decided to respect their wishes and contacted the current owner of the house to ask if a small gathering could be hosted on the premises and entirely outside. As far as DJ and everyone else could tell, the homeowner was kind and understanding and agreed, offering to help out but being clear on boundaries and such. Fast forward to the event itself. My family is arriving, I'd say at around 3 in the afternoon, and I have this horribly anxious feeling deep in my stomach that I can't quite shake. I mention it to my mom, saying something silly that I probably heard on TV about my gut feeling, and my parents shrug it off and tell me it's fine and to come on. I trust my parents, so I step out of the car, all dressed in a cute dress and layered in cheap plastic jewelry. Think Mardi Gras beads, that I proudly chose myself to appear formal for this serious occasion. My mom, my dad, and I all walk towards the backyard, aiming towards the right-hand side of the house as the inside was off-limits due to it being private property when a man busts out of the front door holding a bat. This is not just a normal baseball bat intended to occupy the children. No. This man busts out of his front door, screams at everyone, talking about how horrible we are and how our family is disgusting, all the while gripping a beat-up baseball bat full of nails. Immediately I panic, and my fight or flight, in this case flight, kicks in, and I make a beeline to our old blue car I only just got dragged out of by my dad. I jumped in and slammed the door behind me, panicking with tear-blurred vision and an incredibly upset stomach when I looked out the window and see the man. The crazy man who made the quick decision to target an elementary-age little girl as he took a swing at the car and hit the area above the back tire, creating a loud ringing and a dent. My dad, who took what felt like 5 hours but was probably only around 10 seconds, pushes the man away and jumps in, my mom following quickly behind. We speed away from the house and back home, not mentioning a thing except for how proud of me they were for running, and that they'll listen to me if I ever have that horrible gut feeling that something is wrong again. Though both my mom and dad kept shooting quick glances behind the car and whispering to each other. My family never discussed this event with me around again, but when I asked my mom what happened years later, she explained that the man decided to do a Google search on DJ and found his estranged criminal brother's record on Google and decided that this was evidence enough to attack a family during a wake with a nailed baseball bat. A few months ago, I, 22, was at the local coin laundromat. I went late because I had been studying around 10 p.m. The laundromat is pretty small, closer to the edge of the beach town I live in. The town is pretty well known for drifters and people experiencing homelessness. Most people are friendly and there is a lot of drug use, but I've never felt really scared. Everything was fine until I went to move my laundry to a dryer. I was listening to music on my headphones, but not super loudly. Suddenly, I just got the feeling that someone was watching me. I can't really explain it, I just felt the presence. I turned around and there was a man standing just a few feet away from me. He was some guy with pink hair wearing a full face mask like a ski mask, a hoodie, gloves, and sunglasses, even though it was dark out. The gloves and sunglasses especially immediately made me feel uncomfortable. I thought maybe he was a drifter, maybe high, but I didn't want to be rude. I tried to laugh it off and told him he surprised me. He immediately started talking. A lot of it was disjointed and just didn't make sense. He was talking about coming up from Brazil to bring his brother money to get a classic car. None of it made much sense, but he would ask me questions and wait for me to respond, so I tried just to play along. I still thought he was probably just high or something, but he was standing between me and the only door, and I started getting this gut feeling that he was blocking the door on purpose, not just accidentally as he talked to me. He was getting closer to me as he talked, and the feeling got stronger. Logically, something was off, but mostly I just had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I needed to leave and keep him talking until I could. I started to edge to the side, but he stayed in front of me and the feeling got more intense. I started to grip my keys in attack position just in case. He talked more and then backed off a little. He took off his backpack, which was a child's unicorn backpack, and set it on a nearby dryer. I looked over to the door for just a second, and when I looked back, he was pulling something I couldn't see out and holding it to the side, behind him where I couldn't see it. But I did see what was in his backpack. Duct tape. Instantly, it was just like an alarm went off. There was no more worrying about being rude, no more second-guessing myself that he was just off but harmless. It was like this cold, numb dread just washed down over me. I almost felt calm, like I knew the next steps, knew I had to do something. Time seemed to move in slow motion, and he turned back to me, not saying anything anymore, and took a step forward. I gripped my keys as tightly as possible and tried to mentally prepare for a fight. I remember being afraid that I would move too slow or be too weak, like in a nightmare. But all of a sudden, the door to the laundromat opened and a woman walked in, barely even looking at us as she went to get her laundry. It was like a scene in a movie, a moment of intensity just interrupted by something innocuous, and suddenly, it's over. He just turned, grabbed his bag, and left. I was so scared that I just stayed there a minute until I could get my laundry and just go home. I didn't report it. I never knew what to say since nothing had actually happened. But when I think about it, I think the scariest thing is that he left as soon as someone walked in. If he was just crazy, it wouldn't have mattered. I think a stranger's laundry timer saved me from something terrible. I don't go to the laundromat anymore. I joined a laundry service, and the extra cost is worth it to never go back. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. Me and my friends were freshmen in high school. We frequently went into the woods near our school that had some abandoned structures. Sometimes we went in there to smoke, graffiti, or just otherwise explore. It was always a pretty fun time. On a fall day after school, we decided to go exploring in the woods as we would usually do. For the first 10 or 15 minutes into our little adventure, everything was normal. Then eventually we came across a tree that had a dagger sticking out of it. I immediately got a horrible feeling. One of my friends, Nathan, went over to the tree and took the dagger out, and sure enough, it was 100% real. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking, but a part of me was hoping that it was some sort of gag toy. We all just kind of looked at each other, a little weirded out, but didn't think much of it. Maybe thought someone left it there before we came to mess with it, whoever came across it. That's what we were all hoping for. Nathan put the dagger in his backpack and off we went. It wasn't long after we came across the tree that things started to get weird. I was the first to notice it. There was a man in all black following us, keeping a good distance away. He was always to the right of us, hiding behind some trees. From what I could see, he looked to be of average height, wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and black boots. I wanted to leave the second that I saw him, but when I told my friends what I had seen, I don't think any of them believed me. They just kind of laughed it off. Either they thought that I was seeing things, or they thought someone was just messing with us and they didn't feel very threatened by it. By the time we were about 40 minutes into the woods was when they finally saw him. This time he was a lot closer, about 30 feet away from us. I still couldn't make out much detail about his face because he had his hood on and his head down, although I could see he was wearing a white t-shirt underneath his hoodie. Everyone froze for a brief moment. There were 4 of us, and we just stared, not really sure what to do with the situation. Everyone stood in silence for 3 very long, very scary seconds until he ran further back into the woods, behind some trees, until we couldn't see him. I grabbed onto Nathan's arm, who was the closest to me, and said, "We have to go. Now." I had a horrible pit in my stomach. At first, we made our way back to the entrance of the woods at a jogging pace. I think we were all trying to downplay the experience in our minds to not invoke pure fear and panic. We kept at that pace for a minute or two until we heard leaves crunching and sticks breaking behind us. We turn around, and there he is, trailing us. We started running, and he starts chasing us. I was the one behind the group, so the man was closest to me, and I could hear his heavy breathing. That's how close he was to me, a whole arm's length away. We picked up our speed, and I thought for sure I was going to pass out because I was fairly out of shape, but luckily we made it out in about 25 minutes, stopping once or twice to catch our breath when the man wasn't in sight. Once we all got out, we just kind of looked at each other, trying to figure out what in God's name just happened. We didn't think about it much after. I don't think any of us wanted to think about it for too long. Looking back on it now, we probably should have reported it to the police in case that man tried to hurt any other innocent kids going into those woods. But unfortunately, the thought didn't cross our minds. I don't know if it was him who placed that dagger in the tree or why it was there, and honestly, I don't want to think about it. I don't know why he was there, what his intentions were. I'm just glad we got away, and I hope that he wasn't hurt or hasn't tried to hurt anyone else since. So this was a few months ago, and quarantine was already in place, so I spent a lot more time at home and around home than usual. There is a park very close to my house, so one day I decided to go for a little jog. I ran from my house to the park, and since I don't have a lot of cardio, I decided to take a little break. I noticed that a guy was looking my way, but I didn't think anything of it, until I started jogging again, and he started walking at the same time. Since I was jogging, I eventually lost him, so I thought it was over. But I was wrong. It's now many hours later, and I'm sleeping, when through the window I notice car lights coming back and forth on my street. The window in my room gives a little view into that street. Now, some may think it's normal, but I live in a very quiet neighborhood, so I wanted to see what was going on. As I thought, there was a car that was traveling back and forth on my street. Then, the car stops right in front of my house, and the same guy comes out of the passenger seat, which means there is at least another person with him. Until that point, I was still half awake, but the sight of that same guy looking up to my window, seeing me, and smiling, woke me up real quick. I immediately closed the blinds, which are a tiny bit see-through by the way, and climb into my bed, phone in hand. After a few minutes, I fall asleep, only to be woken up by light tapping on my window. Remember when I said my blinds are a little bit see-through? Well, I could make out the silhouette of a man, probably the same guy since there was still car lights in the street, and he was crouched at my window, tapping from outside. The first thing that comes to my mind is to not move and try to pretend that I'm still asleep, not knowing if he could see inside my room or not, and then I remembered that my room is on the second floor. How did he climb onto the little roof area outside my window? I have absolutely no idea, but I know that going down is not easy. I slowly pulled the covers over my head and called the police, whispering and telling them that the guy was still tapping. They told me to slowly get out of reach of the window in case he breaks in or something, and that they would be there in about 5 minutes. I crawled out of bed and into the bathroom, where I could see the street behind my house, and waited. After a few minutes, I hear the knocking stop, then silence, and then a big thump. Then more silence, and a knocking at my door downstairs. I was still on the phone with the operator when I heard someone call out that it was the police and that the guy was gone. I told the operator that the police had arrived, and they told me to wait. There was silence, and she said the police had not arrived yet, and to not open the door under any circumstances. Soon enough, she tells me police are now there and that I can go open the door. I go check outside my bedroom window out of paranoia, and there were in fact 3 police cars and about 5 or 6 officers outside my house. I go downstairs as one of them is knocking, and I open the door, thank the operator, and hung up. I tell them the whole thing, and they tell me that the guy was already gone by the time they arrived, but that there was no one there anymore. In the next few days, I saw officers on my street, but I never got news about the guy or those guys, and the only thing they found was a rope and a small knife. No fingerprints, no guy, no car, nothing. I'm an overnight security guard that works at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Sorry, just kidding. I'm an overnight security guard for a large building and parking ramp. It's generally a really quiet job with a lot of free time, but occasionally I do have to kick out homeless people. It's a horrible part of the job, and I do my best to direct them to the next safest place to sleep. Most people are understanding as they unfortunately go through this a lot. If anything, they want to vent, and I try to be an open ear. Our protocol is to ask them to leave, then if they don't, tell them to leave, and if all else fails, we have to contact police. I've only once gotten to that step. It's important to note that my general routine at work, I sit in a shack in the parking ramp for an hour, then I go for a walk around the building, then back to the shack. The doors are all locked, but there's an entryway with an ATM that's open 24/7. This is usually where I find people looking for a place to sleep. For more context, I'm a smaller woman and unarmed. On this night, there was a woman trying to sleep by the ATM. I followed protocol, and after the first 2 warnings, I had to contact police. She yelled at me, which was out of the normal but understandable considering her position. It must be frustrating being constantly kicked out of every semi-safe space. The police arrived, and because I was a little scared, I always am, I watched from inside the building, out of view to make sure they got her out. If she was yelling at me, she was full-on screaming at them. This goes on for about half an hour before she leaves the building. Unfortunately, that's all the cops are required to do, so she makes her way to the bus stop right outside. The problem with this is the bus stop is parallel with my shack. She just sits and stares at me with hatred in her eyes. This gets uncomfortable pretty quickly, so I decide to take another walk. When I'm passing the door that leads to my shack, I decide to take a peek out of the little door window. I don't usually do this, but I felt uneasy knowing that she was probably still in the area, and it's a good thing I did. I can just barely see it, but behind my shack I see the slightest wobble. There she was, hiding right behind my shack. It's not a big thing, maybe a 10-foot cube made of large windows and metal right at the entrance to the parking ramp. I have no doubt she was waiting for me. I call the police and just keep watching from the little door window. While I'm waiting, she eventually lets out an angry scream, kicks the miscellaneous junk in front of the shack, and storms up the stairwell on the parking ramp. For an extra kick of anxiety, the floor above me had a broken door that wasn't locked at the time. Eventually, police get there, and after some harsh words, they get her to leave again, and this time she walks off into the night. What really scares me was what I found on my next walk. There's a mirror next to the door I was watching her from. I couldn't see it from inside, but from this side it was obvious. She had broken the mirror and a large piece was missing. Maybe I've allowed my anxiety to build all this up in my head, but from my perspective, she had taken a large, sharp object, hid behind my shack, and waited for me to walk up. You can tell me if I'm overreacting, but to my nameless potential assailant, I wish you better times and a bed to sleep in, but I also hope we never meet again. Being followed home is not uncommon where I'm from, and is sadly not rare either. Men will see you walk at night or even day sometimes and catcall to get your attention. No matter how often it happens, it's not something you can get used to, and it's scary to be in that situation. This night I was with my ex walking him home. He was a horrible boyfriend, and he got extremely drunk, forcing me to walk him home and make sure he goes inside. I asked him to call a taxi for me because my phone was dead, and he agreed and went inside. I stood outside of his apartment waiting, but as time went by, I realized the taxi is probably not coming. At the time, I thought that they forgot to send a car, but I now realize that probably my ex didn't even call. He just passed out. It was December, and it was extremely cold outside. I was angry at my ex for getting drunk, angry at the taxi company for forgetting to send a car maybe, angry at everything and just angry at everybody. It was almost midnight, and if you read my previous experiences, you will understand why I didn't want to walk home even though it was only a 15-minute walk. As I'm waiting, I see a Jeep park a little further away from me. The guy gets out of the car and leans on it, just staring at me. After a couple of minutes, I realize that he is waiting on me to approach him, and if I don't, he'll be the one to make the move. I panic and start thinking what to do. I have two options. One is to walk home and risk him coming into my street, which is dark and a great place to hurt someone. A 15-minute walk is plenty of time to get hurt. Or my second option is to walk to my grandma's house, which is 5 minutes away, but the whole street to hers is dark and pretty much empty. She lives on a street that is mostly stores and offices. She refused to sell her house when other people did, so there aren't many houses around her. I couldn't get into my ex's apartment because I had to be buzzed in and it was midnight. I decided to go to my grandma's and start quickly walking. The guy, of course, gets directly into his car and starts driving behind me. I pretend that I'm on a call in hopes that he wouldn't do anything if I was on the phone with someone. And as soon as I see my grandma's house, I start running and quickly go into her yard. Everyone is asleep, so my best bet is to ring the bell because I don't have a key and hope someone might be awake. Thankfully, my uncle is. I tell him someone is following me. He drives a Jeep and I'm scared he might hurt me. My uncle doesn't hesitate. He runs out into the cold December night in his shorts and t-shirts and sees the guy. He yells to me, "Is this him?" as loud as possible. The guy sees this and pretends he's on his phone and gets into his car and drives away. My uncle calls a taxi for me and waits until the taxi gets there. I thought that would be it. As soon as I got into the taxi, I felt safe, and I tell the driver my address, and as soon as he turns, we see the car. He tries to follow the taxi. At this point, I have absolutely no clue what his intentions are. Is he armed? Does he want to hurt me because I got my uncle on him? I start crying and quickly explain to the driver what's going on. He was an older gentleman, and I felt like he had been waiting on this moment his whole life. He told me not to worry, that he'll lose him, and he won't allow for that guy to see where I live. He did lose him, mostly because the Jeep gave up and just left. But that taxi driver got to feel like a hero, and he was, and I got home safely. I, a 30-year-old female, work from home currently, but had to travel into the office, which is in another city, to pick up some equipment during my shift. I don't have a car, and it's a pain to get there and back. The way over was uneventful, and up until this point the way back mostly was, other than getting stuck behind an open drawbridge on the bus. Now a bit later, I decided to transfer to the streetcar for the final leg home because Google had recommended it would be quicker than staying on the train. I got a few stops in when an elderly couple ran for the streetcar, asking the driver to wait for them. Fair enough. Now behind them, a younger, unkempt-looking guy also ran for it and boarded through the doors behind me. I was sitting near the front next to the elderly couple who didn't seem to speak any English. I believe they were Mandarin speakers. I heard some commotion behind me and looked back when the unkempt guy ran up to where I was and started saying something weird and unintelligible to the older couple. At this point, I could tell he was off, and the couple didn't understand what he was saying either, and I was at most worried that I would have to defend them against him if he got too erratic. At this point, he started talking to me. Again, he was talking some nonsense I could barely catch, and I tried to ignore him, but he kept getting closer into my personal space. No mask, by the way, which is hypothetically required on this public transport, and started screaming at me, calling me Melissa and telling me to talk to him. Normally I try to ignore people like this since my city has a lot of very mentally unstable people. Meth and crack are also big problems in my neighborhood, and making eye contact often encourages them to escalate, but he was way too close at this point, so I tried not to look directly at him and just said, "Who's Melissa?" I maybe could have handled it better, but I was pretty shaken. He said something like, "The female spirit in your male body." Now, I'm transgender, so I guess he focused in on this, and then went on to say, like, "Isn't that right, Duncan?" And I told him I didn't know who any of these people were. I didn't know him, to please leave me alone, etc. This went back and forth for a few seconds, with him interjecting to all the onlookers who were now staring that we were married. And then he grabbed me. I freaked out, told him not to touch me, and he just doubled down. At this point, we were at a stop a bit closer to mine, but not all the way. I got up and knocked on the driver's door and told him what was happening, and he asked if we knew each other. The guy repeated we were married, and I said, "Good God, no." And the driver asked him to leave, and he refused. The driver said he'd call someone, but the thing is, I've seen in similar but less severe situations before, and I know what everyone is thinking. If I had to wait on this streetcar, not only would I still be with him, but everyone would be mad at me too for holding up their trip. People here mostly won't help strangers who are in trouble, and in fact they'll be upset at you for inconveniencing them with that. So, I made a decision. I was just going to jump off at this stop and try to lose the guy. Naturally, he followed me off and started getting more hysterical, yelling what he thought was my full name, saying I was possessed by demons, crying, the whole 9 yards. I just started backing away when this younger female law student from the campus nearby, who I guess had seen what had happened, walked up and offered to walk quickly with me downhill and make sure he didn't follow. I thanked her, and we did. And when we were down the hill on campus, and I was sure he was gone, I thanked her again, and we went our separate ways. So this story happened when I was 13. I asked my mom to go to Starbucks, and she agreed, but she said she wouldn't come inside with me. She gave me her card, and I walked to the door. I noticed there was a man a little distance behind me, so I decided to wait for him so that I could open the door for him because I thought it was polite. He gave me a warm smile and thanked me, so I thought nothing of it. He was in front of me in the line, and he suddenly put out his wallet that had mounds of cash in it and purposely shows me. Then he says, "There's more of this in the bathroom. Want to come see?" I didn't understand what he was implying at first, but I still politely declined because I knew that I shouldn't go anywhere with strangers. After getting my drink, I walked back to my mom's car and told her what had happened. My mom didn't think anything of the man's actions and just thought he was being a nice guy. When the man walked out of the store, my mom and I both smiled and waved at him from the car. Now, thinking about this experience years later, it's so scary because I had no clue what was happening back then, and I only just realized what could have happened to me. I live in a town which is quite like a party town, so people come here in the summer to swim in the lake, drink, and partying a lot. Then, as autumn hits, the tourists go home and the town is silent and peaceful again. Last summer I was in the city center, waiting for my boyfriend to pick me up and go to a trip near the town in the afternoon. I waited in front of a shopping center, so I stood there for about 10 minutes and saw people passing by. Also some friends who just got out of the shopping center, and suddenly this old man who seemed to be in his 60s approached me. To be honest, my first thought was that he was a homeless person because he had dirty-looking clothes and long, dry hair. Also, he was wearing jeans and a jacket in the middle of the summer, so this was a big red flag to me. To tell about myself, I'm a 20-year-old, tall, sporty-built girl with copper-red hair. I can say I am pretty harsh with the beggars and creeps, otherwise you can't get rid of them. So, this man stood in front of me and asked where are some good restaurants nearby. He spoke in English, so I thought maybe he's not homeless, and told him nicely about the restaurants. I used to guide tourists, so it wasn't odd to me, but the odd thing just happened after this. He thanked me for the advice, and I thought he would go away, but he stayed, looked me up and down, and he started to introduce himself. He told me his name and that he was from France. He didn't seem to have a French accent, and asked if I was waiting for someone. I thought he just wanted to small talk a bit. In my country, not many people speak English well, so they rather pretend to not know a word in that language, and it would be nice to a foreigner to speak a bit with someone. So I said yes, and I'm waiting for my boyfriend. He seemed a bit angry after I mentioned my boyfriend. He asked my name and age. My gut told me to get out of there, and I lied about both my name and age. I said I was 16, and I don't look like 20 years old anyways, and I wanted to keep my age in the illegal interval, just in case he got the message. He asked if my boyfriend has a car and what kind of car. I obviously didn't tell him, so I lied again. How old he was, I told him that he was 25. He's 22. I didn't want to be a drama queen, so I pretended to be calm, but all my nerves screamed at this point. I looked for some familiar people on the street, but no one was there. Suddenly the man grabbed my hand and held it in his hand and asked if I would grab a drink with him. I ripped my hand out of his and told him no. What is he thinking? And to buzz off. I didn't wait for him to leave, so I was the one who left first, and in super speed I started walking to the nearby skate park because I knew some of my friends spent a lot of time there. Also, the skate park is right next to the police station. I didn't have the nerve to look behind me, so I just walked as fast as possible. There was no one I know at the time, but I saw these boys sometimes here with my friends, and there were also some who I saw at the high school a few years ago, so I sat on the bench next to some skater's backpack, and then I looked back. The man was on the other side of the street, staring directly at me. The boys at the park approached me because they told me that I looked pale and asked if I was okay. I told them about the man on the other side of the street, and when everyone looked at him, they finally got the message and left. My boyfriend arrived 2 minutes later. I texted him where I was prior, and he was in a traffic jam, so that's why he was late, but it's not a weird thing. There's a lot of traffic jams here in the summer. And so, I don't know what that man wanted, what would happen if I didn't go to the park. I thought after that I overreacted to the whole situation, but I don't know. Something was really not right with that man. Anyways, I'll never forget a look on his face while he talked to me, and he just talked so quiet, almost in a whisper. There was clearly something wrong with him. When I was 6, I went with my mom, uncle, and grandparents to the airport. My grandparents were taking an international flight. This was in the 80s, so this meant we were allowed to walk all the way to the gate and wait with my grandparents right before they boarded the plane. Times have changed and this is no longer allowed. My mom was sitting with my grandparents having a conversation. My uncle was off getting coffee somewhere, and being 6 years old, I became bored of sitting and started to wander off a little. My mom called me to her and gave me the stranger danger talk and how I needed to stay with them. My attitude was like, yeah, whatever. Again, my mom got distracted by my grandparents' questions, and I began to wander off again. I peeked my head and looked down the hallway. There were people coming and going, and less than 15 feet from me, I saw a creepy man, long brown hair to his waist, dressed in black leather head to toe, beard and a mustache. He was about to open a door, which I'm assuming now was a bathroom. As he opened the door, he looked right at me and waved his finger to me to come there. I immediately thought of the conversation my mom had with me just a few minutes ago. Plus, the guy looked evil. So I immediately turned and ran back to my mom. I said, "Guess what, Mom? A stranger was trying to take me. You were right." I don't remember her taking me very seriously. She was helping my grandparents with their tickets and wasn't paying too much attention. When it was time to leave, I took a quick peek down the hall and he was gone. I think to this day, what would have happened if I went with him, and if my mom didn't talk to me about strangers just a few minutes before? I know this wouldn't have turned out good. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember to head over to Sir Spook's channel to listen to me in his new video.